Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Robin Dwyer.
And I'm Sally Burdett. Our top stories. US Federal Reserve Chairman Jay Powell warns holding interest rates too high for too long could jeopardise growth.
Drowning in debt. Britain's biggest water supplier says it could run out of cash by next June.
A day of mourning in Kyiv after missile strikes killed 41 people across Ukraine, including at a children's hospital.
And nowhere is safe. Gazans are forced to flee again as Israel steps up its military offensive, and Hamas warns of disastrous repercussions. In the United States, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell is back in front of Congress with interest rates and inflation top of the agenda.
Our correspondent Karina Mitchell joins us now from New York. Hello, Karina. Markets, of course, have had their eyes on Powell's testimony in Congress today. I'm interested to know how they've reacted, but also whether Powell has given any clues as to whether a rate cut is on the horizon.
Well, that is the million-dollar question, Sally and Robin. Good to be with you. Largely positive reaction to what Powell had to say. When markets opened today, the S&P and NASDAQ started at fresh record highs. And just under 2 hours since Powell started speaking, just to give you a sense, the Dow is off just a fraction. The S&P is higher by 0.2%. The NASDAQ higher by more than 0.2%. So still chasing fresh records today. But investors very interested for clues on what the Federal Reserve is going to do with interest rate cuts. Will they come anytime soon? Now, I have to say, Powell was very measured, very balanced in his remarks to the Senate Banking Committee during his semi-annual testimony to Congress. He started off by saying that the labor market is still very resilient. He said unemployment is low at 4.1%. We just got that data on Friday. But then he said that GDP growth has moderated in the first half of the year. And then he made a very important remark, quote, saying cutting too little too late could unduly weaken the economy. That bolstered the markets at that point when he said that. And I think it was very important for everyone to realize that the Fed is so aware that its next step is crucial. It has to be very careful not to tank all of the good work that it's done. He then went on to say, quote, more good data would strengthen confidence that inflation is moving towards its 2% target. We definitely expected that word confidence to come up. And he may just get another shot of confidence in the latest round of inflation data. CPI, the Consumer Price Index for June, comes out on Thursday, estimated to come in at 3.1%, down from 3.3%. Now, the Fed is projecting just one rate cut this year, 25 basis points, but markets are increasingly betting, now 77% odds that we'll see two rate cuts, the first one to come in September. Sally, Robin.
Yeah, interesting what Powell is saying. He's known for liking to give people a pre-signal that he's going to make a move. So possibly that's good news to come. Talk to us about these record-breaking July 4th air travel figures. How significant are they? What are they saying about the market?
Yeah, well, the travel surge is definitely on. So let me just give you the data first, because the TSA, the Transport Security Authority, says that a record more than 3 million plus people crossed security checkpoints in the U.S. on Sunday at the tail end of that July 4th holiday weekend. It says it is the most people it has screened in a single day since it started keeping records. The previous record was 2.99 million, which it hit on June 23rd. 8 of the 10 biggest single days for people crossing those checkpoints have come this year. So what it says very clearly is that we are surging past pre-pandemic levels when it comes to travel. Part of the reason for that is that hotel rates are cheaper and airfares are cheaper than they were last year. In fact, AAA says that a record 70.9 million Americans will have traveled 50 miles or more for the July 4th holiday weekend. So that surge is definitely on. It has bolstered, for the most part, airline stocks, and it's a good precursor to Delta Airlines, which is set to kick off earnings season, in fact, later on this week. Sally, Robin.
Thank you so much, Karina Mitchell, coming to us live from New York.
Shares in BP are down after it warned that second quarter profit will be lower than expected. The oil giant says weak refining margins mean earnings will be up to $700 million below what it had forecast. And it's expecting to write down up to $2 billion as it scales back operations at a German plant because of weak demand.
Moody's has downgraded Kenya's debt rating further into junk territory, with the ratings agency warning the outlook was negative. Last month, President William Ruto withdrew plans to improve state finances and access more international monetary fund financing after the bill triggered anti-government protests that killed at least 39 people.
Porsche sales are down 7% for the first half of the year, driven by a 33% drop in China and a 6% fall in the United States. The luxury car maker saw growth in Europe, with executives hoping that new and updated models next year would give the brand a boost.
Dyson is cutting nearly 1,000 jobs across Britain as part of a global restructuring plan. The maker of the world's first bagless vacuum cleaner says the company has grown quickly, but over a quarter of its UK workforce is now facing redundancy. The innovative company is known for its cyclonic cleaners, air purifiers and hairdryers.
Disney has unveiled plans to launch a new cruise ship that will set sail from Tokyo in 2028. The ship, which will become the entertainment giant's ninth, will carry up to 4,000 passengers and is expected to make more than $600 million in annual sales. It's part of a 10-year expansion plan for Disney's theme parks and cruise business.
At least 7 people have been killed in the U.S. state of Texas after it was hit by Hurricane Beryl.
It knocked out power to nearly 3 million homes and businesses, and hundreds of flights had to be cancelled. Our correspondent Tony Waterman reports.
It has now been downgraded to a tropical storm, but when it slammed into the Gulf Coast in the early hours of Monday morning, it was a Category 1, packing winds of about 150 kilometers per hour. This toppled trees, it brought down power lines. There was a lot of rain that came with it as well. Houston saw a month's worth of rain in just a couple of hours, and this was all compounded by a storm surge of more than 6 feet, so about 2 meters. That ocean water just flooding inland. And you could see these images of homes that looked like they were in the middle of the ocean themselves. Now that the storm has weakened and it is tracking more northward, the cleanup process is already underway in Houston, and the focus now is really on restoring power. There are millions of customers that are without electricity right now in the middle of a Texas summer. The temperatures in the Houston area are expected to be in the mid-30s this week, so restoring that power is going to be a top priority. But it could take time, because after Hurricane Harvey in 2017, it took more than 2 weeks to get everybody back on the grid. But Beryl is the first of what could be a very active hurricane season. Scientists are expecting up to 13 hurricanes this year, 7 of which could be major storms. And just to put that into perspective, that is more than double the average. And scientists say this really comes down to climate change. The waters right now are at record high temperatures, and that hot water really feeds these storms, makes them bigger, makes them more powerful, makes them more destructive. And with these waters remaining at these temperatures, we are teeing ourselves up for a very destructive, potentially, and very active hurricane season. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Austin, Texas.
France's shock election result on Sunday has left the country in political turmoil. Who exactly will run the government is still undecided.
President Emmanuel Macron asked his Prime Minister, Gabriel Attal, to remain in post to try and ensure stability after he offered to resign. Attal led the president's Ensemble alliance to second place behind the left-wing National Popular Front, which won the most seats. Its parties worked together to push the far-right National Rally, led by Marine Le Pen, into third place. No party has an outright majority allowing it to govern. Let's talk to our correspondent, Stuart Smith in Paris. So, Stuart, no one has a clear majority here. So what happens now?
Well, President Macron seems reasonably relaxed about this. He's going to wait until July 18th when the various lawmakers who have either been elected to the first time to Parliament or are returning will finally decide exactly what political groups their political parties are joining, and then the landscape will be clearer to work out what alliances and blocs may be able to be formed. It's not something that ordinarily happens in French elections, which are designed to produce a clear majority, and so as to which government could be formed between which parties and then which prime minister might lead those parties is the debate at hand. Throughout Monday and Tuesday we've seen various politicians put their names forth, mostly from the left, which received the majority of votes in this election, but not enough, received the largest number of votes in this election, but not enough for a majority. But it's an open question as to whether they will be able to form a coalition amongst themselves, perhaps with some centrist MPs, or whether perhaps the final government comes from a mixture of centrist and more right-wing lawmakers. All of that still to be decided, but a tricky one to try and arrange when of the three blocs, the right, the centrist and the left, none of them secured close to a majority, and also they were struggling even to find a potential path to government.
So we saw Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party pushed into third place, and now they're facing more difficulties.
Yeah, third place and without anyone saying they would like to go into coalition with them. But indeed, now the leader's in trouble with the law. And the allegation that has been made by the prosecution here in Paris, which they're looking into, is that she accepted a financial loan, misappropriated property, engaged in fraud and potentially forgery. A swathe of allegations relating to her election campaign in 2022, a presidential election campaign which she lost to Emmanuel Macron, the French president now. These claims will be investigated by police, and while they are doing so, they are not releasing any details. There's been no comment, though, from that leader.
Stuart, thank you very much. Our correspondent Stuart Smith in Paris.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Britain's biggest water company is in deep debt and says it could run out of money within a year.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos and unicorn companies. Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
For China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us. And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliette Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more.
Just gotta be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back. Britain's biggest water supplier says it could run out of cash by next May if it can't raise more funds.
Thames Water is heavily in debt and could be nationalised by the new UK government. The company has faced fierce criticism over its track record of spilling sewage into the country's waterways. James Wallace is the chief executive of River Action, which campaigns to clean up British waterways. He told me what had gone wrong with the UK's water industry.
Well, deregulation is what's happened. A cutting of red tape for the past 14 years, which has allowed water companies like Thames Water to pollute with impunity whilst running to the hills with our money. They've accrued a huge amount of debt. They've given a lot of money to their shareholders as well, rather than investing in fixing their leaky infrastructure. And that's what we're witnessing right now. Our rivers, particularly the Thames and the Thames catchment, are full of dangerous pathogens like E. coli and also nutrients like phosphates and nitrates that are finishing off wildlife too.
Is nationalising water the answer? Because we know that water in England was largely privatised in 1989. Is nationalising the answer, or rather tighter controls, regulatory controls, by government, no matter what system water is under?
Well, we definitely need to see a reform of our regulators. The Environment Agency and Ofwat are not capable of doing their jobs. They've had their teeth removed and their legs and feet bound. So it means that if you're a water company, you can put your shareholders' interest before the paying public and bill payers, and also before wildlife. So what we need to see here is a direct and urgent intervention where water companies are made to invest up front. And of course, shareholders need to be incentivised and need to be seen to make a return in a private market. But there may be situations like with Thames Water where they might benefit from a short or long period of nationalisation or municipalisation.
At the moment, Thames Water is saying that they want a 44% increase in bills for consumers between 2025 and 2030 because the need for upgrading our water systems is going to cost a lot of money. How are we going to fund the resources, the infrastructure that's required to look after this precious natural resource without quite literally selling ourselves down the river?
Well, I can't think of any other private business where the customer should pay for the capital expansion of the company providing a product or service. Instead of allowing shareholders to make, and they do make, very significant returns on their investments, why aren't they the ones that are covering the costs of expanding networks, increasing capacity, and dare I say it, fixing leaks? I mean, one of the most important things, whatever that happens in the price review, the draft determination is being published this week, we must make sure that bill payers are not the ones clearing up the mess of the past. That's absolutely critical. Shareholders should be doing that. It's their responsibility, and the boards of the organisations responsible, particularly Thames Water in this case, and not bill payers to clean up the mess of the past.
Increased rainfall is one of the reasons given by Thames Water for the problems that they have had. Is that the sort of challenge that we need to be insulating ourselves against? And are you seeing that sort of mindset, that understanding come through?
Well, a little too late, I would say, by a few decades. You know, we've known for 40 years or more that climate change is going to reap havoc on our infrastructure, particularly our combined sewage network, which has to deal with extra rainfall and groundwater ingress, so when water tables rise, as well as the growing population at the same time. However, there's some disingenuous communications being done by this particular organisation, Thames Water. They are telling everybody that it's only when they spill sewage because of high rainfall that they're responsible for polluting the river. That is absolutely not true. Under their permit licences, they are not required by the government to remove all bacteria and pathogens, microplastics, viruses and so on, which means that all treated effluent from all of their wastewater treatment plants is full or partially full of potentially dangerous bacteria. We know that because we've been testing this, and it means that people are worried about using the river that they should have free use of. So rowers, swimmers, kayakers and so on are putting their health and potentially their lives at risk. At the same time, Thames Water are telling us it's safe and it's not their fault, and that is absolutely misleading and wrong.
Argentina's President Javier Milei wants additional support for his sweeping economic reforms, with inflation at 300% and half the population in poverty. And China could be key, with its companies targeting investment opportunities. Our correspondent Joel Richards reports.
Argentina's long-anticipated reform package has become law this week. It enables President Javier Milei to push forward with his ambitious plans for investment and tax incentives for businesses. Overseeing many of these reforms will be the economist Federico Sturzenegger, sworn in as head of the newly created Ministry of Deregulation and Transformation of the State last Friday. He was Secretary of Economic Policy in 2001, shortly before the country's economic crisis. He was also central bank governor between 2015 and 2018. A central part of the government's bid to attract fresh investment is the new programme called RIGI, designed to bring in investments of over $200 million.
It is a register of investors that promotes investment in infrastructure, technology, energy and tourism. In certain sectors with investments over $200 million.
Many Chinese companies will be looking at potential investment projects in Argentina, but the pattern of trade between the two countries has shifted this year. Historically, Argentina has posted a trade deficit with China, but in May, Argentina posted the first monthly trade surplus.
Exports have increased 37% compared to the same month last year, but imports have dropped around 39%. There was a considerable fall in imports.
The backbone of Argentina's exports to China are agricultural products. There is significant growth in lithium production, but economic activity has fallen in the first year of the Javier Milei administration. According to some economists, this explains the country's trade surplus with China.
This has to do with the economic recession. Recession in the industrial sector decreases demand for goods, raw materials, and other components that are imported for production. As production falls, demand for imported goods falls.
Despite the encouraging signs, economic recovery is still a way off. Inflation is running at nearly 300%. Many organisations such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank have similar forecasts for Argentina's economy. They expect the recession to continue this year, but for the country to post growth in 2025. Tuesday marks Argentina's Independence Day, when President Milei will seek to refloat his proposed consensus with governors over the government's economic plan. Joel Richards, CGTN, Buenos Aires.
In Japan, visiting Mount Fuji is becoming more popular thanks to social media and more affordable because of a cheaper yen.
But the number of visitors is taking a toll on the mountain. So, controversial strategy has been adopted to deal with this. Our correspondent Chris Gilbert reports.
Mount Fuji is welcoming hikers the way it has for hundreds of years. Except this season, something is different. For the first time, each of these hikers must pay to access the most popular mountain trails. The local government says it has introduced the fee to keep visitors safe. Last year, the mountain experienced overcrowding near the summit, and officials say many hikers were unprepared for the harsh conditions of the nearly 4,000-meter heights.
We needed to respond to the increased number of accidents, to climbers who ascend and descend without rest, and to those who are not properly prepared and violate etiquette to stay warm. We calculated the cost of these services per hiker, and the result was the new 2,000 yen fee.
But the cost hasn't deterred hikers.
I'm quite happy to pay that if it maintains the mountain, so there's people who look after us, and if the 2,000 yen helps towards that, I'm happy to pay.
Yeah, it's challenging because it creates a barrier for folks to access this, but I'm generally in support of supporting our parks in the U.S., and so a similar logic applies, I think.
The new measures aren't limited to the fee. Yamanashi has also kept the number of daily hikers to 4,000, and it has restricted access to the popular trails to between 3 a.m. and 4 p.m.
This is the start of the Yoshida Trail. It's one of the most popular routes up Mount Fuji. And at these gates just behind me, for the first time ever, there are wardens checking hikers for yellow wristbands that say that they have paid the 2,000 yen entrance fee.
Yamanashi has also been struggling to adapt to the surge of tourists off the mountain. At its base, this convenience store in the town of Kawaguchiko recently experienced a spike in visitors spurred by social media to photograph the Mount Fuji backdrop. So officials responded by erecting this black screen to block the view and deter TikTokers. But visitors responded by ignoring the cautionary signs and ripping holes in the screen. Experts say Japan needs to better educate tourists on etiquette, but should couple the carrot with a stick.
By introducing a visitor tax or increasing prices in some way, that can not scare off, but certainly can encourage less serious or perhaps less mindful visitors.
Over the last 2 months, Japan has passed its pre-pandemic inbound visitor numbers. The challenge of hosting the surge of tourists is only growing. Chris Gilbert, CGTN, Yamanashi.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. A day of mourning in Kyiv after missile strikes kill 41 people across Ukraine, including at a children's hospital.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference? The difference is in the detail, the background,
defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story, wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
We are all connected. Across borders, across continents, connected by ideas, a shared humanity. Stay connected.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Robin Dwyer and Sally Baudet. The headlines once more. US Federal Reserve Chairman Jay Powell warns holding interest rates too high for too long could jeopardize growth.
Drowning in debt. Britain's biggest water supplier says it could run out of cash by next June.
Egyptian media says there's been progress on many points in Gaza ceasefire talks. The head of the CIA has been meeting the Egyptian president in Cairo.
There'll now be more negotiations in Qatar tomorrow. Well, let's talk to our correspondent in Cairo, Adel El-Marouki. So, Adel, it sounds like some progress is being made.
This has been announced, as you've mentioned, from Egyptian sources who have been speaking to local media, unnamed sources who appear to be have first-hand information from the ongoing negotiations. Egypt, for the past 2 days, have been holding intensive talks. Yesterday, a delegation led by the Israeli security institution Shabak, the head of it, and along with several members of the Israeli military, were here in Cairo for negotiations, as it seems that Egypt and Qatar together are trying to finalize a ceasefire agreement along with a hostage exchange deal. Today, the Egyptian president spoke to William Burns, director of the CIA, through which Egypt renewed its calls for and insistence for Israel to end its military operation in Gaza immediately, warning about the grave consequences that it has on the humanitarian conditions for the Palestinians there. Egypt has been insisting not to cooperate with Israel in managing the Rafah crossing, the main gateway through which aid gets through to Gaza. Egypt insists that Israel withdraws from the Rafah passage so that it can resume its normal operation from the Palestinian side. But what exactly are the points of agreement? That has not been announced. So we're still waiting for further information about what exactly has been agreed upon. But again, this will be depending on how the next round of talks, as you've mentioned, tomorrow in Qatar's capital, Doha, the four countries, Egypt, Qatar, the United States, along with Israel, will be there to talk for the ceasefire deal. And also the following day, on Thursday, the talks for the ceasefire will come back to Cairo. So a lot of effort that we're seeing in this week, but will it actually yield result? This is what we will wait and see. Maybe by Thursday we'll have some news.
So it sounds like the will to continue talking still there. But do you know what the sticking points are that everyone needs to agree on?
Well, basically, there has been a finger-pointing from Hamas and the Palestinian factions, who've today issued a statement saying that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's persistent insistence to continue the military operation that is actually ongoing this week. Also, Israel's call for Khan Yunis to be evacuated, displacing about 250,000 Palestinians. They say such measures will take any progress that has been made in the ceasefire talks back to zero, so a reset to any progress that will happen. This is according to them. Now, one of the main issues that we've been seeing standing in the way of reaching an agreement is Netanyahu's insistence to continue the war in Gaza until Hamas is defeated. And any agreement that has been trying to be brokered by Egypt and Qatar, we've seen this insistence on and on. And of course, there's nothing that will force Hamas to accept such terms, basically signing a deal to release hostages and allowing Israel to continue its operation. So this is basically what needs to be resolved. Egypt says there is progress. What exactly, we will see.
Adel, thank you very much. Our correspondent Adel El-Marouki in Cairo. Thousands of Palestinians are fleeing their homes in parts of Gaza City as Israel steps up its military offensive in several parts of Gaza.
Palestinian militant group Hamas says continuing Israeli attacks could jeopardize ceasefire talks and lead to what it's called disastrous repercussions. Let's speak to our correspondent Jonathan Regev in Tel Aviv now. Hello, Jonathan. So what is the Israeli perspective on the ceasefire talks? Jonathan, I'm not sure if you can hear us. I think we might have just lost our connection to Tel Aviv. But let's then pick up staying in that region, because meanwhile a group of independent human rights experts has advised the UN that a growing number of child deaths in Gaza indicate that famine has spread across the enclave. Our correspondent Akram Al-Satari reports from Deir al-Balah.
The strikes that have been continuous for the last few days have already taken hundreds of lives. At least in the last 12 hours, around 32 Palestinians were killed. 19 of them were killed in Al-Burej in Gaza central area. 9 others were killed in one incident in An-Nusayrat in central Gaza. 4 others were killed in An-Nusayrat in another incident. 2 others were killed in Deir al-Balah area in Gaza refugee, in central area of Gaza refugee camp, in Deir al-Balah refugee camp, and some other people were killed in Rafah and also in Ash-Shaja'iyya, Al-Zaytun, Ad-Daraj, Al-Sabra. So the massive bombardment that has been taking place and the ever-increasing military pressure entailing moving the people from their areas, from their homes into the unknown and asking them to stay in the recognized shelters as described by the Israeli forces has left them vulnerable and has left them with no much of an option, while the warfare despair continues to take their life, destroy their homes, and to leave them in a great deal of despair and fear of the future that might also come with things that they don't favor or they don't expect because of the ongoing surprises by the Israeli occupation. As for the famine in the Gaza Strip, or as for the starvation that people of Gaza have been facing for the last 9 months, according to the government media office, a special release was made, and in that special release they were highlighting the fact that Gaza has not received any humanitarian aid trucks for the last 64 days. And according to the UNRWA as well, since early May, no humanitarian aid is entering Gaza, and that leaves the people leaves them exhausting all coping mechanisms, the positive one, the negative one, and leave them with no option whatsoever. According to the very same government media office, around 35 Gazan children died because of the famine and because of the malnutrition, and also there are some widespread health diseases related to the deprivation of food and the malnutrition among the adults as well. So according to the government media office, the famine has been hitting the people of Gaza, and the continuation of the policy of besieging Gaza and targeting the people is likely also to increase the number of the victims and to increase the suffering of the population.
Akram Al-Satri there in Gaza. Let's see if we can get our line through to Jonathan Regev in Tel Aviv. Hello, Jonathan. We just heard the dire humanitarian backdrop in Gaza, but we know that these peace talks continue, and there's hope that there will at some point be a breakthrough. I wonder if you could give us the Israeli perspective, what's being said in Israel about these ceasefire talks.
Yes, so the headlines coming, say, in the past 2 hours or so, saying that following those talks in Cairo, which were mentioned in the report, there is room for optimism, but there's also plenty of work to do. According to those reports and things that we've heard throughout the day coming out of Egypt and out of Israel, progress has been made for the past few days. The head of the Shabak, the Internal Security Agency, Ronen Bar, was in Egypt for the past few days negotiating. He came back to Israel. And how important is that meeting in Doha tomorrow? At least on behalf of Israel, we know that it's important because both Ronen Bar, which we mentioned, and the head of the Mossad, the Israeli Secret Service, Dedi Barnea, will also, both of them will be traveling to Doha. So Israel is putting a lot of emphasis, a lot of importance in these talks. And the headlines, once again, are portraying a positive image, an optimistic image, but one that says that it's still not time to congratulate anyone for anything. There's still work to be done. And having said all that, we have been in such places before and eventually nothing happened. There have been instances in which there were negotiations and both sides were expressing optimism, and eventually it did not happen. Therefore, until we see a signed deal, and that's not something that's going to happen tomorrow or the day after, that's going to take at least a few more days. Until we get to that point, there's still plenty of work to do. We know that there's still demands by Hamas, which Israel finds unacceptable. There's still demands by Israel, which Hamas finds unacceptable. So bridging those differences is still a difficult work to do. There's still plenty of work to be done, but clearly optimism being portrayed here in Israel, and not only in Israel, as we've heard in Egypt as well.
All right, thank you so much for that update. Coming to us live from Tel Aviv, Jonathan Regev.
A day of mourning is being held in Kyiv after a children's hospital was hit and other cities across Ukraine struck by missiles, killing 41 people and wounding 190.
The strikes were among the heaviest the capital has seen since the conflict began. The United Nations Security Council is meeting at Ukraine's request to consider the attacks. The UN said it was likely Russia was behind the hospital strike.
We remind this council that hospitals have special protection under international humanitarian law. Intentionally directing attacks against a protected hospital is a war crime, and perpetrators must be held to account.
Well, let's go to Kyiv now and talk to our correspondent there, Megumi Lim. So, Megumi, rescue efforts continuing at this children's hospital in Kyiv.
That's right. Ukraine declared a day of mourning today after yesterday's devastating Russian missile attacks across Ukraine. I was just at this children's hospital in Kiev that was struck by a missile yesterday. Now, search and rescue operations concluded actually midday today, but the work to clear the rubble and the debris is still continuing, especially at the toxicology building, which was reportedly directly hit by a cruise missile. Now, this is where children used to receive dialysis treatment, and the blast wave yesterday was so powerful that the building across from it, which was a trauma ward, had all its windows shattered, and also the building was heavily damaged. Today I saw emergency workers working to cover up these broken windows with plywood, and today as I was walking around the hospital, I also saw medical workers, hospital staff going from room to room to see if there were any medical equipment that could be salvaged. Now, authorities say that there were about over 600 patients and about a similar number of staff, hospital staff, working at the hospital, at the medical center yesterday when the attack took place. But just visiting this site again today, just looking at the sheer scale of devastation, it is clear that it is going to take a huge amount of money, effort, and also time to rebuild a hospital like this one.
So, Megumi, what are people saying that this attack shows about the need for Kyiv and other cities for better air defense systems?
That's right. As you mentioned earlier, this was the heaviest attack on Kiev in almost 4 months and one of the deadliest airstrikes of the conflict. The death toll from yesterday's attack is now at 41. But the last massive attack that took place 4 months ago targeted Ukraine's energy infrastructure, including Kyiv. And as a result of those attacks, a huge portion of Ukraine's energy generating capacity was destroyed. And since then, Ukrainians across the country have been enduring rolling blackouts. On bad days, we get just about 3 to 4 hours of power each day. And this is why President Zelensky has been calling for more air defense systems. And obviously, after yesterday's devastating attacks, he's again renewing pleas for more air defense systems from Ukraine's Western allies. Germany has already pledged one more Patriot air defense systems. It is the third Patriot it will be sending to Ukraine, and the United States is also considering sending one more Patriot air defense battery to Ukraine.
Megumi, thank you very much. Our correspondent Megumi Lim in Kyiv.
Let's go to Moscow and speak to our correspondent there, Dasha Chernyshova. Hello, Dasha. So we heard that the UN says it is likely that Moscow was behind the strike on this children's hospital. But what exactly is the Kremlin saying?
Well, Moscow maintains that it is not targeting the civilian objects in Ukraine. It insists that only the objects of military infrastructure of Ukraine come under the Russian strikes. We also have heard the Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov most recently saying that this is the so-called PR action on the blood, as he has described the way that Ukrainian authorities are using this strike against the children's hospital. He has reiterated that Russia has indeed carried out a group strike on Monday against the military targets in Ukraine. However, Russia was targeting the Artyom industrial plant that is providing and producing aviation ammunition for the Ukrainian military. It is, according to the Russian officials, located in just about 2 kilometers away from this children's hospital. And given the footage of the damage made to this hospital, Moscow says it is obvious that Russian strike has hit the Artyom plant, while it was the Ukrainian air defense missile that has hit the children's hospital. And if Ukraine had not located its air defense systems so close to the residential areas within the city boundaries, this tragedy would have been avoided. So certainly the Russian officials maintain that the goal of Russian strikes is the military infrastructure, while they say it is the Ukrainian air defense missiles that have resulted in these damage done to the children's hospitals in Kyiv.
We're also hearing that Vladimir Putin has been hosting India's Prime Minister. What have they been discussing?
Well, a lot of issues have been on the agenda, and we understand that these issues have been discussed both in the formal and informal settings in Moscow. Ukrainian issue has also been one of those topics that the two have discussed constructively, according to the Kremlin, with Narendra Modi, Indian Prime Minister, actually saying that peace is needed for the future generations, and it is impossible, in his words, to start the peace negotiations amidst the bombs, shells and guns. So he was urging for the restart of the dialogue and the finding of the political settlement to this conflict. Russia has thanked this approach, but also we understand that the sides have been talking about the cooperation of these two countries on the international agenda in the G20, in BRICS organizations. But most importantly, they have been talking about bilateral issues that are related to energy, trade. The new goal that they have set for 2030 is to achieve trade turnout between these two countries up to $100 billion against $65 billion in 2023. They are also extending their cooperation in the energy sector, with the Russian Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak saying that they are talking about the permanent contract for the Russian oil supplies to India, something that could be condemned is the West, because the West believes that Russia's oil profits are benefiting Russia's military actions in Ukraine. So certainly a lot of issues have been discussed, and we are looking forward to see how these two countries will be implementing the plans that they have set for themselves.
Thank you so much. That's our correspondent in Moscow, Dasha Chernyshova.
The EU has suspended Georgia's accession process to the bloc over a controversial new bill. The governing Georgian Dream Party approved a law that would brand Western-backed NGOs and media outlets as foreign agents. It's led to thousands of Georgians protesting in the streets.
US President Joe Biden's spokesperson has said he is not being treated for Parkinson's disease. This after growing concerns over the 81-year-old's health. A media report said a doctor specializing in the condition had visited the White House 8 times over the past year. Biden's personal doctor issued a statement saying he'd not seen a neurologist outside of his annual physical checkup.
United Airlines says a wheel fell off one of its planes as it took off from Los Angeles on Monday. The airline says the plane was able to land safely with no one on board injured. The aircraft involved was a nearly 30-year-old Boeing 757. United says it's investigating the incident.
Rescuers in Indonesia have resumed their search for 45 people still missing after a landslide on Sulawesi Island. At least 17 people were killed when torrential rain caused tons of mud to fall onto villagers working at an illegal gold mine. Rescue efforts have been hampered by the weather.
Tens of thousands of people have been displaced in northern Bangladesh after flooding swept away homes. Heavy rain caused a river to burst its banks, destroying dams and bridges and submerging farmland. Forecasters say more heavy rain is expected over the coming days.
Rescue workers have sealed a 226-metre breach in a dike at China's second-largest freshwater lake.
The dam burst on Friday after torrential rain. Our correspondent Xixin Chen reports from Dongting Lake.
The bridge point has already been successfully sealed, but then there will be a lot more reinforcement work to do to reinforce that bridge, of course, to pave the surface and to add waterproof layers so that they can later on to dry the flooded area behind me. And so earlier that we spoke to rescuers and experts on how they achieve these process of fixing that bridge. And now let's take a listen.
We are very excited and happy witnessing the breach being sealed, and we are very proud. With the weather being extremely hot and work spots scattered around, it needed a lot of coordination. We conquered all kinds of difficulties, and we were united to accomplish the mission.
Artificial intelligence helped us to quickly get a data of the velocity of the flow when the dike breach occurred. With our independently developed model, we could also analyze the process of flood routing as fast as possible. Based on the basic information of the dike, we've divided zones with possible risks. For those at high risk, we've analyzed their stability so as to offer data support to provide further alerts about any bursts.
So definitely drones, helicopters, and other advanced technology have been used to canvass the region to provide that data necessary to fix that bridge and, of course, to rescue people. No casualties found. So, and the thing is, the team on the ground, 3,000 or so rescue teams can be able to actually fix that bridge in about under fewer than 80 hours. And the one main reason is that when they're fixing that bridge, filling the rocks and sand, they were using trucks on the dike to really kind of moving from both ends of the bridge. And then they also use ships that they can actually operate on the water, and that drastically improved the efficiency.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Preparing for launch. The European Space Agency readies its next generation rocket as the EU looks to regain its access to space.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference? The difference is in the detail, the background,
Defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference. Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The great transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us. And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Welcome back.
The European Space Agency is preparing to send its new Ariane 6 rocket into space for the very first time.
The next generation spacecraft is cheaper than its predecessor and can launch multiple satellites into different orbits. If successful, Europe would regain its independent access to space. Since last summer, the Space Agency has been relying on SpaceX to launch its satellites. Rüdiger Albert is the former program manager of Ariane 5.
Today we will live the ultimate flight test, and this is something which is coming after 10 years of intense work. So that's a very special day for all the ESA and industrial teams. What do we expect? We expect that we will test our vehicle for the first time under real space environment. This is something we cannot do completely on ground, and there will be a lot of firsts in the flight sequence. What we expect is that we will produce a successful demonstration allowing to pave the way for Ariane 6 to build up its career on the basis and the ground of the experience we have got on Ariane 5 over 27 years.
You were the program manager for Ariane 5. What's different this time from that rocket?
Ariane 6 is simply better. It is more versatile, allowing to bring different passengers to different orbits in a single flight. So it will be economically more viable. Second, there's not only one Ariane 6, there is a series with different configurations, going a big, broad spectrum of mission capabilities.
The headlines again. US Federal Reserve Chairman Jay Powell warns holding interest rates too high for too long could jeopardize growth.
Drowning in debt. Britain's biggest water supplier says it could run out of cash by next June.
And a day of mourning in Kyiv after missile strikes kill 41 people across Ukraine, including at a children's hospital.
That's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you so much for watching.
There's more on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Facebook, Instagram and TikTok.
And you can go to CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow. Same time, same place. From all of the team here in London, it's goodbye.